Imagine that you are a Dorian youth, looking with your warband over a moonlit Minoan city. Its citadels, once proud and gleaming, are now hidden behind battle-worn, defensive walls. You grip your spear, imbued with the confidence that you have come to impose civilization upon these cities and all their decadence. The return of the Sons of Herakles, or the Heraklids, was the myth which the ancient Greeks had about Hercules' banished sons returning to Greece to conquer its cities and take their rightful place as its ruling caste. The Spartans believed that they were the descendants of these Heraklids, and that they had the blood of Hercules, and therefore of Zeus himself, flowing through their veins. In this episode, I want to talk about the Spartans, the problem of civilization and nature which they represent, and the centrality of the Barbarian in the rise and fall of civilizations. I will discuss how the conquering Barbarian brings with him the return of nature, since the Barbarian has been shaped by nature, while the civilized man has lost his nature in the comfort of civilization. And most importantly, I will prophesy the return of the Sons of Herakles in modernity. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche wrote, "To be sure, one must not resign oneself to any humanitarian illusions about the history of the origin of an aristocratic society, that is to say, of the preliminary condition for the elevation of the type man. The truth is hard. Let us acknowledge unprejudicedly how every higher civilization hitherto has originated. Men with a still natural nature, barbarians in every terrible sense of the word, men of prey, still in possession of unbroken strength of will and desire for power, threw themselves upon weaker, more mellow civilizations in which the final vital force was flickering out in brilliant fireworks of wit and depravity. At the commencement, the noble caste was always the barbarian's caste. Their superiority did not consist, first of all, in their physical, but in their psychical power. They were more complete men, which at every point also implies the same as more complete beasts. At the foundation of every society, and at its end, we find the figure of the barbarian. The very birth of civilization arose and subsequently has always arisen from a barbaric, nomadic ruling caste imposing themselves upon a more civilized, sedentary population. And when these civilizations eventually fall, there have always been barbarians at the gates who had retained their nature and were ready to impose themselves upon the crumbling civilization and start the cycle afresh. This cycle of rise and fall, this dance between the barbarian and the civilized man, is caused by the very nature of civilization, which distances man from nature, and by alleviating the pressures of nature, causes his own inner nature, his own instincts, to weaken, to grow lethargic, undisciplined, decadent, nihilistic. Therefore, once civilized for a number of generations, the barbarian lacks the energy, the will, the vital force to sustain the civilization which his once barbaric and disciplined nature created. And we can see this cycle playing out very clearly in the history of civilization in the Mediterranean. The Minoans are the first civilization which we know of who dominated the Mediterranean. Excavations on the island of Crete have unearthed the sophisticated palaces, the frescoes, and the advanced urban planning of the Minoans. And from the layers of destruction in the archaeological record and the apparent abandonment of certain sites, we know that Minoan centers experienced a decline during around the 15th century BCE. During this decline, the Mycenaean civilization of the mainland rose in power, giving rise to the world of the late Bronze Age, which we see in the pages of Homer. We call this age and this civilization Mycenaean because of the ruins of Mycenae, which Agamemnon rules over in the Iliad, and because this site seems to have been a center of power for the Mycenaeans. However, in the Iliad, the Greek forces are referred to as the Achaeoi, or Achaeans, as well as the Danoi, or Danans, and the Argaioi, or Argives. These last two names are given in accordance with the Mycenaean city of Argus and its mythical founder, Danaus. Therefore, I'm going to use the word Achaean to denote Mycenaean civilization, since it's easier to distinguish from Minoan, and it seems to be more historically accurate. Achaean palaces displayed architectural similarities to the Minoan structures, but they also had their own distinctive features. And the Achaeans used the same early Greek language as the Minoans, known as Linear B. The Linear B documents, notably from Pylos and Knossos, give us insight into the Mycenaeans' administrations, their economic activities, their religious practices, and these documents point to the assimilation of the Mycenaeans, of the Achaeans, into a pre-existing culture of the Minoans. All of this fits perfectly with the narrative which we receive in the myth of Theseus. Imagine a ship setting sail into the ink-black waters of the Mediterranean as Theseus, a young hero, gazes back at the moonlit port of ancient Athens. He is one among 7 young women and young men sent as a tribute to King Minos of Crete every 7 years. They are intended as a sacrificial offering to the Minotaur, a creature born from the unnatural union of Minos' wife and a bull. On the sea breeze, Theseus already feels that he can smell the stench of the wretched half-man, half-bull, wafting from the corridors of the labyrinth beneath the halls of Knossos. But for Theseus, already a renowned hero, the name of the Minotaur does not instill fear in him, but rather a lust for the taste of blood and for the thrill of combat. In the myth of Theseus, Theseus is the barbarian, conquering and subjugating the civilized Minoans, who are represented by the Minotaur. Yet the myth portrays him as a bringer of order and civilization, who is subjugating a chthonic, subterranean beast. This is how the barbarian views himself, and how we have received history through the myths of the Indo-Europeans, from the Olympians and Aesir subjugating the Titans and the Vanir, to Zeus, Thor, and Hercules conquering various serpents and subterranean creatures. The barbarian does not see himself as uncivilized and barbaric, but rather as a bringer of civilization and of order. The tribute of youths sent to Crete may echo the historical reality of a Minoan tribute system, which would have been imposed on Achaean territories. It could represent the actual historical seizure of Achaean youths, either for some sort of sacrificial ritual, perhaps to a bull-headed Minoan god, or maybe just as slaves and as servants. But either way, the myth clearly reflects the hegemonic control exercised by the Minoans over the Mediterranean at the time. The Labyrinth of Knossos likely represents the intricate palaces and architecture of the Minoans, and it may also be symbolic, more broadly, of the complexity and sophistication of the Minoan culture that the Mycenaeans, or the Achaeans rather, would have encountered during their expansion. Theseus' victory over the Minotaur then would represent the emerging dominance of the mainland Achaean powers over the Minoan centers. Theseus' romance with Ariadne, the daughter of Minos, who helps him navigate the labyrinth, likely reflects what we see in the historical and linguistic record, that the transition from Minoan to Mycenaean or Achaean civilization was not a simple conquest, but a process of cultural synthesis and coexistence as much as one of conflict, of conquest, and of rapid expansion. In the myth, after killing the Minotaur, Theseus, along with the other Athenian youths and Ariadne, escape Crete and return to Athens. However, Theseus forgets to change the black sails to white on his ship as a sign of victory, and this causes his father, King Aegeus, to believe that his son had perished, and to throw himself into the sea in despair, giving it its name, the Aegean. Therefore, we see that the sea is given an Achaean name, which may be thought of as symbolic of the Achaeans' conquest of and claim over the entire Aegean and its islands, which were once centers of Minoan power. The Mediterranean, which was once the domain of King Minos, is now Achaean territory, named after the king of Athens, and Athens, which once had to pay tribute to Crete, is now freed from the terror of the Minotaur. Just as the myth of Theseus appears to represent a dramatized version of historical events, could the Spartans' claim that they descend from Herakles also be based upon historical reality? The world of the Spartans was not the Greece of Homer's Iliad. The civilization of the Achaeans, just like that of the Minoans before them, would decline and fall during what is known as the Greek Dark Age, which was around the 12th century BC. This Dark Age was part of a larger Bronze Age collapse, which you've probably heard of, and marked the transition from the Greece of the Bronze Age to the world which we typically refer to as Ancient Greece, the world of Athens and of Sparta. The Greek Dark Age is marked by a gap in the historical record where written evidence is scarce. The linear B script used by the Mycenaeans disappears, and the Greek language undergoes a series of changes that give rise to the Greek alphabet and to Homeric or Epic Greek, as well as the dialects of Attic, Aeolic, and Doric, which was notably spoken by the Spartans. The once mighty palaces and urban centers of the Achaeans, like Mycenae, lay in ruins. The pottery styles and architectural features gradually vanished from the landscape, and this period witnessed a simplification of material culture, with smaller settlements replacing the grandeur of the Mycenaean citadels. The Greek myth of the return of the Sons of Herakles was associated with this Bronze Age collapse. The myth says that after Heracles' death, his sons faced persecution from Eurystheus, the king of Mycenae, and his supporters. To escape this threat, the Heraclids were forced into exile. That is, the descendants of Hercules were forced out of Mycenaean Greece. The Sons of Herakles sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi to determine their destiny, and the oracle prophesied that the return of the Sons of Herakles was fated to occur after a period of oppression and hardship. Under the leadership of Heracles' son Hylas, the Sons of Herakles led a series of military campaigns which allowed them to successfully capture the Peloponnese and establish themselves as the rulers in different states within the region. This myth and the belief that the Spartans were descended from the Heraclids is widely attested in both mythic and historical sources, and ancient Greek historians such as Thucydides and Herodotus considered this myth to be based upon real historical migrations and conflicts. The archaeological record seems to indicate that there was indeed an invasion or a migration which either led to or contributed to the decline of Achaean civilization, just as had happened to the Minoans. During the Mycenaean decline, the Achaeans were building defensive walls around their cities and leading to nearby water sources, indicating that by this time they were under the threat of constant attack and siege. They were living in fear. Taking all of this into account, it does seem likely that the Spartans were part of a broader movement of Doric-speaking peoples into the Peloponnese. This theory has traditionally been called the Dorian Invasion, and posits that one of the Greek tribes, the Dorians, migrated into the Peloponnese, bringing their Doric dialect with them, and contributing to the collapse of Mycenaean civilization and the establishment of a new political order in various Peloponnesian cities. The most compelling evidence for the Dorian invasion may be just how foreign the Spartans seemed to the other Greeks. The Spartans were extreme isolationists and considered themselves to be superior to the other city-states. They behaved much more like an occupying force than a native people. Integration and intermarriage with conquered peoples, which seems to have been a common practice among most Indo-European ruling castes in Europe, was not practiced by the Spartans. The Spartans kept themselves strictly apart from the local populations which they had conquered. Their society was structured around a rigid social hierarchy. There were the Spartiates, who were born of Spartan parents. They were the warrior class, highly trained and dedicated to military service. There were the Perioikoi, who were free inhabitants of the Spartan-controlled territories surrounding the city, and they served as craftsmen, merchants, and in various support roles. And then there were the Helots. The Helots were state-owned serfs subjugated to Spartan rule, who provided agricultural labor. Their treatment was extremely harsh, in part due to the fact that it is estimated that there were 3 times as many Helots as there were Spartans, and the Spartans were therefore in constant fear of revolt. Central to the Spartan way of life were eugenic practices that aimed to produce the strongest and most capable warriors. The Spartans viewed mothers as playing a crucial role in rearing strong warriors, and considered the death of a mother in childbirth to be just as honorable as the death of a warrior on the battlefield. This view contributed to the Spartan women enjoying a much greater amount of freedom and equality than the women of other Greek city-states. And this is another aspect of Spartan life which the Athenians viewed as foreign and barbaric. This again is more evidence for the idea that the Spartans came from outside of Greece. Where exactly we do not know. Ancient sources tell us that at birth, infants were inspected by state officials, and if the baby displayed any physical deformities or weakness, it was deemed unfit to become a Spartan citizen and was exposed and left to die, typically on a hillside. This was not uncommon in ancient Greece, but it was not practiced systematically in any other city-states. Spartiates from the age of 7 underwent an intensive training regime known as the agoge. This training was designed to create disciplined, physically fit, and fearless warriors, and was yet another avenue for eugenic selection. Only the Spartan youth who excelled in physical training and displayed mental fortitude were admitted to higher levels of the agoge. The Spartan boys would live in communal barracks, and their education was overseen by older youths. They underwent grueling exercises to develop their strength, agility, and endurance, and they were trained in the art of phalanx warfare, and apparently also in the art of dance, which would help increase coordination and agility. The boys were given only a cloak, no shoes, no bedding, and they were expected to steal or hunt for their food, which would force them to be crafty and intelligent. All of these hardships were designed to toughen the Spartan youth and prepare them for the rigors of war. The Spartans shunned material luxury. They only ate something called black broth, allegedly, which doesn't sound very good, and they refused to use money. Luxury and wealth were discouraged, and so were the arts, and therefore Spartan poetry and philosophy is scarce, and the primary focus was on military training and physical fitness. For this reason, the accounts of Spartan practices may in fact be exaggerated, either by the authors or by the Spartans themselves, who sought to project an image of fearsome military might. For example, Plutarch writes that Spartan husbands and wives were forbidden to live together. The men and the women lived separately and were forced to have sex in secret in order to keep their marriages exciting. He also writes that strict monogamy was considered shameful since the Spartan state did not want to exclude the possibility of a fruitful coupling. It is possible that all these things, though a bit humorous and outlandish, are in fact true, but it is also possible that they are rumors and exaggerations, since the Spartans were extreme isolationists. Even if exaggerated, the harsh Spartan discipline and the belief that they were the rightful masters and rulers of the Peloponnese by divine descent by birthright, is characteristic of the aristocracies formed after a barbaric, nomadic people has conquered a local, agriculturalist population. The barbarian, who has been shaped by the harsh pressures of nature, by the difficult and warlike life of the nomadic pastoralist, recognizes the importance of applying artificial pressures to himself in order to maintain the strength of his inner nature in civilization. In fact, the barbarian recognizes that the very purpose of civilization is that it allows him to apply pressures to himself and to gather resources to himself, which the nomadic lifestyle would not allow. To use a concrete example, we can look at the effects of civilization on the body. When living in nature, either a pastoralist or hunter-gatherer lifestyle, the pressures of daily life will keep you fit and healthy. You will not look like a bodybuilder, of course, but you will be strong, you will be lean, and generally you will have a beautiful body. Sometimes people will try to counter this idea by pointing to tribes who live in very hot environments and tend to be overly lean, even emaciated, but this is an adaptation to an extreme environment, just as the Eskimos, for example, tend to carry more fat. But as a general rule, life in nature, as a pastoralist, as a hunter-gatherer, hunting, fishing, riding on the steppe, will apply pressures to your body which will make it beautiful and healthy. This is especially true of pastoralist peoples whose nomadic lifestyles were especially rigorous and whose diets were of particularly high quality. When comparing the skeletons of the pastoralist Indo-European invaders with the native agriculturalist populations of Europe, we can see, as expected, that the farmers had much worse health. This is because agriculture is the first step towards mitigating the pressures of nature. It is the first step on the path towards civilization. The skeletons of the European agriculturalists, the Bronze Age farmers, were small. Their bones were thinner, their teeth crooked, all a result of their softer, less nutritious diets and a more sedentary lifestyle. Instead of spending hours in the saddle or hunting in the mountains, they would spend hours in the field. This is representative of the great danger of civilization more generally. Without the pressures of nature, man loses his own inner nature. His body, his instincts, his will, his vitality begin to atrophy. This is why it is vital to impose artificial pressures upon yourself in civilization. For example, going to the gym so that your body does not become fat, soft, and weak. The great advantage of civilization is that it allows you to actually surpass the potential which you have in nature. Again, bodybuilding is a great example of this. If Steve Reeves or Arnold Schwarzenegger or Mike Menser were in a hunter-gatherer tribe, they would likely all have been great warriors, but they would not have been able to achieve the beautiful bodies which they got through bodybuilding, and of course the use of steroids. Their potential would have been limited. The genius, Alexander, Caesar, Goethe, Nietzsche, is not possible in nature. It is the excesses and the wealth of civilization which allows them, like the flower of a great tree, to muster all of the resources which the trunk provides and to blossom. The fruit of civilization is genius and excellence, far surpassing anything found in man's natural state. In other words, his state as a hunter-gatherer, as a tribesman, or as a nomad. And I call these states natural because they are the default states of existence for man as an animal. They are how man has lived for hundreds of thousands of years, and how we would resume living if we were, for example, dropped on another planet with little resources and no memory of agriculture or civilization. So now let's get back to the Spartans. The Spartan way of life, might makes right enforced by law, is often considered by people to be a kind of state of nature, a return to nature, an unleashing of the forces of nature. But from what we've just discussed, we can see that the Spartans' extreme practices were not in fact natural. The Spartans were not practicing the laws of nature, but rather a form of hyper-civilization. They used the state and the resources which they collected from the great population which they ruled over to put more pressure upon themselves than they would have received in nature, and to select for a specific goal, the creation of a caste of superior warriors. In nature, many of the babies which the Spartans exposed probably would have survived. The Spartans used the state, they used civilization, and the resources which they acquired from the great population which they ruled over to put more pressure upon themselves than they would have received in nature, and to select for a specific goal, the creation of a caste of superior warriors. And this was accomplished. While the Spartans did not contribute much to Western material or literary culture, their role in the Greco-Persian Wars was crucial in preserving Greek culture and even the sovereignty of Europe as a whole. Quote, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." End quote. This is the inscription that the Spartans left at the site of Thermopylae, where King Leonidas and his 300 warriors, knowing that they were soon to be surrounded and slaughtered by Persian forces, laid down their lives to give the rest of the Greek forces time to retreat and regroup. When Xerxes sent a messenger to tell Leonidas and the Spartans to lay down their weapons, Leonidas replied, "Come and take." To this day, we remember the Spartans as great warriors, and in America, we fly the words of Leonidas, "Molon labe," come and take, on flags, marked with the Spartan helmet. The problem with the Spartan model, if I may offer a criticism, is that it is too restrictive on an individual's freedom. Their laws were aimed strictly at creating warriors, and they accomplished this, but at the cost of much else. The Spartans created no Alexanders, no Platos, no great conquerors or poets. Almost all of their energy was devoted to training for war, ensuring that the Helots did not revolt, and putting down the revolts when they did. This allowed them to brag that they needed no walls. Their shields were their walls. But it also, in a certain sense, subverted the very purpose of civilization. Civilization provides a foundation to prop up great individuals. It provides the conqueror with an army, the king with a kingdom, the artist with chisel and brush, the poet with pen and paper, and thus it allows the creation and enactment of great civilizational projects. But in order for the vision of the genius, of the superior individual, to be realized, he must have a certain freedom to enact his will and to use the resources of civilization as he pleases. To summarize, the purpose of civilization is the cultivation of individual and collective greatness, which allows man to be overcome, which allows man to create something higher than himself out of himself. Civilization allows for the cultivation and enhancement of the raw material of nature. But the great danger of a civilization comes when a society does not allow for this, when nature is not preserved within civilization and within man. Then civilization falls. Then the barbarian, who still has his nature, sweeps in to conquer the declining civilization and start the cycle afresh, just as Theseus and the Achaeans did, just as the Sons of Herakles did, and just as I believe will soon happen again. Of all the civilizations which we know of, we have strayed farthest from nature. We have isolated ourselves from nature, within and without, distanced ourselves from our instincts, and lost them in the process, and thus forgotten what life truly is. We have forgotten nature. Not just forgotten, but actively sought to eradicate her, to force her into the caves of the earth, as Ouranos did to the giants, the offspring of Gaia, and to force nature within us into the darkest crevices of our minds and souls. And for this greatest of all offenses, this greatest of all sins, this supreme hubris, we are being punished, and our civilization is crumbling before our eyes. As Nietzsche prophesied, man himself is withering and diminishing before our eyes. I too will end this episode with a prophecy and an appeal. You sons of Herakles, You who still have the flame of nature within your chest and the spirit of the barbarian in your heart. It is up to you to cultivate nature within yourself, to strengthen nature within yourself, and to become the barbarians at the gates of this crumbling civilization. It is up to you to carry on the torch of nature, for civilization is nature harnessed and elevated. It was Prometheus who first harnessed the power of fire, of raw nature and will, and out of it birthed the arts of civilization. And it was Herakles who freed Prometheus from his chains when Zeus sought to force him back into the depths of Tartarus. Here is my prophecy. The Sons of Herakles are returning again, sweeping down from the cold heights of the mountains, rising up from the frothing waters of the seas, and it will be their will which shapes the next cycle of civilization. And here is my appeal. Become these Sons of Herakles, my brothers. Stoke the flames of nature within your heart, and strive to become like that great son of Zeus who harnessed his violent nature to accomplish great labors. Strive to become a master of this earth, and to birth a generation of heroes like the earth has never seen.